You said something 3 days ago. Maybe it was a joke that didn't land. Maybe it was a sentence that came out wrong. Maybe it was something you didn't say when you should have, or something you did say when you shouldn't have. And your brain has not let it go, has been returning to it with a fidelity and a detail that your conscious memory almost never applies to things that actually matter, has been replaying it from different angles, rewriting the script with better versions of what you could have said, imagining the other person's interpretation of what you actually said, building entire hypothetical futures from a single conversational moment that the other person has almost certainly completely forgotten. And you know this is irrational. You know the mental energy being spent on this is wildly disproportionate to its actual significance. And knowing this has done absolutely nothing to make it stop, which is precisely what makes it so frustrating and so worth understanding completely. Because the reason your brain replays conversations is not a quirk or a weakness or an anxiety disorder. It is a specific, documented, evolutionarily grounded neurological process that your brain is running for reasons that made profound survival sense for a very long time. And understanding those reasons is the first step toward interrupting the loop without fighting the entire architecture of your own mind. The primary psychological explanation for conversational replay is rooted in what researchers call the social monitoring system, the brain's dedicated neural machinery for tracking, evaluating, and learning from social interactions, which evolved because for the vast majority of human history, social relationships were not a source of comfort or enjoyment as an optional addition to survival. They were survival itself, and the brain that could accurately evaluate the quality of its social interactions, detect potential threats to its social standing, and learn from social mistakes before they accumulated into social exclusion, had a decisive survival advantage over the brain that processed each interaction once and moved on. Your brain replays conversations because it is trying to learn from them, trying to extract the social information that will help it navigate similar situations more successfully in the future, trying to identify what the other person's words and tone and body language actually meant beneath the surface of what was said, trying to determine whether the interaction represented a threat to your social standing that requires a corrective response. And this process, while it can become excessive and genuinely debilitating, is not in its basic architecture a malfunction, but an overactivation of a system that is doing exactly what it was built to do, running the social simulation again and again, because the social stakes it evolved to protect against were genuinely, lethally serious in a way that the rational modern mind knows they usually aren't, but that the ancient social brain cannot fully accept. There is a second and more specific psychological mechanism driving conversational replay, and that is the Zeigarnik Effect, named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who discovered in the 1920s that the brain maintains active cognitive representation of incomplete or unresolved tasks and situations far more persistently than it maintains representation of completed ones, because the unfinished situation requires ongoing cognitive resources to hold open the possibility of resolution, while the finished situation can be filed, processed, and released from active working memory. Every conversation that ended ambiguously, every exchange that left a social question unanswered. Did they think less of me? Did I offend them? Was my response adequate? What did that pause mean? Is registered by the brain as an open cognitive loop, and open loops generate the involuntary attentional pull that brings the conversation back into consciousness again and again, not because the brain is punishing you for the social mistake, but because it is keeping the file open on the grounds that the situation may still be resolvable. that the right response might still be generated, that the social damage might still be repaired, even when the rational mind knows perfectly well that no amount of internal rehearsal will change what was already said to a person who is no longer in the room. The third layer, and the one that makes conversational replay most persistent in the people who experience it most intensely, is the role of self-concept threat, which is the specific neurological alarm that activates when a social interaction has produced evidence that conflicts with your desired self-image. When something you said or didn't say has created a gap between the version of yourself you want to present to the world and the version that actually showed up in that conversation. The brain treats self-concept threats with the same basic defensive urgency that it brings to physical threats, which means the replay is not just cognitive review. It is the brain's threat response system running damage assessment, trying to determine how serious the self-concept wound is, whether it can be healed through reinterpretation, and what behavioral changes would prevent the same threat from recurring. And the more central the relevant self-concept is to your identity, the more intense and more persistent the replay will be. Which is why the conversations you replay most obsessively are almost always the ones that touch the aspect of yourself you care most about being seen accurately: your intelligence, your kindness, your competence, your likability, because those are the social verdicts that feel most consequential, and that the brain is therefore least willing to accept as final without extensive review. And the solution? The genuinely psychologically grounded way to interrupt the loop rather than simply trying to think about something else, which works approximately as well as trying not to think about a pink elephant, is the practice of cognitive closure, of deliberately and consciously completing the open loop by making an explicit internal decision about the conversation. Not a resolution of the uncertainty, because the uncertainty may be genuinely unresolvable, but a decision to close the file on the grounds that continued review is no longer producing new information, that the lesson has been extracted, that the social reality of the interaction is now fixed and beyond the reach of further internal rehearsal, and then, crucially, redirecting the attentional resource that the loop was consuming towards something that the brain can actually complete. Because a mind given a finishable task will release the unfinishable one far more readily than a mind left alone with the instruction to simply stop. Subscribe for more mind secrets.